Hi, welcome to day 8 of my 30 days Python series. Today we're going to learn functions in Python. We will see how to create functions. We will see parameters, arguments, and we are going to do a mini project at the end of this video. So let's first see a small definitions about functions. A function in Python is a named block of code that perform a specific task and can return a result. Okay, the simple way of explaining function is that a function can perform a specific task and it is going to return a result. Now a function can take arguments, like it can take input from the users and then it is going to perform a task and it's going to return the results. Okay, now if you see here, it says it is defined using the def keyword, which we will see again, and it allow you to reuse code by calling the functions whenever it is needed. So that means in Python most of the things that you do using functions, right? So that means somebody has written some code based on some logic and we simply use by calling those functions, right? Just writing the function's name and we give the parameters, we get the results. Like if I talk about calculator, so in calculator you basically give two numbers and then you select you want to do a sum or whatever you want to do, right? And you get your results. So same way we can create a function based on logic, and whenever it is needed, next time we don't have to write the code, we can simply call the functions. Now we are going to do a lot of things today, so it's going to be really fun and interesting. So let's start the video. So let's first see how to create a functions. To create a functions, I'm just going to add a cell here, and the syntax is very simple. You just need to say something called def. Okay, so once you say def, and you need to give a name for the function. So let's say I'm going to first solve this problem, which is called write a functions that greet people, something like this, hello world. Okay, so simple hello world. I'm going to write a function that's simply going to return hello world. Okay, so for that, let's say I'm going to name this function called greet. Okay, so here you usually define your parameters, like if your function is going to take some parameters from the users. Okay, so if in case you don't want to give any parameters, that is fine. So we can simply go ahead and say colon sign. It is a mandatory. Each functions will take a colon sign, so that is a mandatory. Now here I can return whatever the result I want to return. Okay, so I can go ahead and say something like this, result. Okay, result equals, and I can print a statement called simple hello world. Okay, so let's put it in this bracket and let's say return. So in this return, I'm just going to print this result. Okay, now if I just execute these functions, okay, the function is created. Now if I want to call the functions, I can just go ahead and say greet. You see by default it is coming. You can just say, you can see it's saying greet hello world. Okay, so as soon as you execute greet, it is saying hello world. Okay, so let's understand it again, what is happening here. I'm saying def, by mentioning this keyword, which is def small letter, you give the functions. Okay, this is how you create the function. You say def and then you give the function name. Okay, now this parenthesis is mandatory because inside this parenthesis we're going to give the parameters in the future. So this functions doesn't take any parameters. Here we have not given any parameters. So what it is going to do is that inside this functions, whatever the code you are going to write here, all this code is going to be executed if somebody call this functions. Okay, now I only have one code which I am storing inside this called result. Okay, and then in every functions it takes two things. Okay, you say def and you give function name. Here you give the parenthesis. Inside the parenthesis you define the parameters if in case you have any, and then you simply say return. Okay, so simple way to understand a function, something like this. You say def function name parenthesis and you say colon, and you just need to write a return what you want to return. Okay, here you can write the code. Okay, if you don't define this return, so by default it is going to be none. Okay, let's say that I want to create a functions that simply do a sum of like 1 and maybe 2. Okay, so for that I can just go ahead and say 1 plus 2. Okay, simple. This is what this function does, because this is a line of code, and I can store this something called sum. Inside this sum I can store this 1 plus 2. Okay, now even if I return here, okay, and I can just go ahead and execute it, and let's call this functions. To call this function, you just need to give the function's name. As this function doesn't take any parameters, so we can simply call these functions like this. Okay, as soon as you call these functions, you need to again give the parameters, parenthesis, and you can just run it. Now you can see this function is not returning anything. Why? Because here in the return we have not defined anything. Okay, so this is simply kind of doing a calculations 1 plus 2, and we need to return that in the result. Okay, so in this return you can define this 1 plus 2 here, or you can just return this variable. So anyway it works fine, or you can just put your return here. So both ways it is going to work fine. Okay, now what is happening, this function simply does one task, which is called summing 1 plus 2. Okay, Now if you see it here, if I now run it, you see now it is returning 3. Okay, very simple. Def function's name, and if you have any parameters, you will define it inside it, which we will see now. And if you do not have any parameters, whatever you want to execute, you execute here, and then you mention it in the return by saving it into a variable, or you can just mention like this way. Okay, or you can write a print statement as well. Okay, we can go ahead and say that, write a print statement. We can go ahead and say print, and we can go ahead and say the sum of 1 plus 2 equals, okay, and here we can just do a sum of 1. Here we can do a sum, right? I can just put it at top formatting 1 plus 2. Okay, let's call it. Okay, so you can say I'm getting this, right? But I need to put the result here somewhere here. Okay, so I can just go ahead and put the result here. Okay, I mean, you can just write a print statement. So we can just go ahead and say the sum for 1 plus 2 is below. Okay, because we have not created a variable, so I would just execute it. If I run it, I'm just getting a statement, which is, you can see it here, and then what I'm getting here is that I'm getting the results, okay, which you can see it here, because in return you need to define what you want to return. Okay, now this is how we create functions. We need to say def, and we're going to say the name, and we will define a parameters if in case we want to give any parameters. Now parameters is a placeholder, you can say, where you can give a different arguments later on by calling the functions. Okay, now we will see that. Okay, now we want this functions to take our name, and then it gives us a greetings. Okay, like hello, welcome, something like this, welcome to Zero Analyst. Let's say something like this. We want a function that greets something like hello, welcome to Zero Analyst YouTube channel. Okay, so for that we will be creating a function. So let's go ahead and create a functions. So the task is very simple. Take a name from user and greet as hello, welcome to Zero Analyst. Okay, so this is what we want to do. So simply it will ask the name, and then it is going to basically give this which is called Zero Analyst. Okay, so for that, let's go ahead and start new functions called def, and we will say za greet. Okay, maybe we can just go ahead and say greet and za greet for Zero Analyst. So any name you can give it. So I'm just going to give it name like this. Now this function is going to ask a name. Okay, so we need to give the name here. So we can go ahead and say here name is our parameters, which is 1. Okay, now we only want to take one parameters, which is called name. Okay, so here what I will do is that I would just need to give a column, and what I want to print. Okay, so I want to print something like this. Okay, I can go ahead and say print. Okay, now we can save that in a results, but let's go ahead and say that what I want is that maybe print. Okay, and I can go ahead and say welcome to Zero Analyst. Okay, welcome to Zero Analyst. Now we want to say hello, welcome to Zero Analyst. Okay, so we will put the hello here, hello, and in the placeholder I'm just going to use F formatting. F formatting, and I would just put the name here. Okay, so it takes a name from the user, and then it basically, you can say it basically print that, right? It takes a name from the user, and then it kind of print hello, name, and welcome to Zero Analyst. Let's say I want this in the new line, so I can just go ahead and use a new line formatting here. So fine, so that is fine. Let's go ahead and kind of say that we want this in return. Okay, so these things we want in the return. Okay, let's execute it, and let's say greet. This is the function's name. Now this name I need to give, see, now this name is a parameters, so here I need to give the name. Simply I can give the name something like this. Okay, let's say Sam. Okay, hello Sam, welcome to Zero Analyst. Okay, now you can see here this name, it can be anything. Okay, when you define a functions, this parameters can be anything. It can be a number. If I just give a number here, okay, it's going to do something like this. Hello 1, welcome to Zero Analyst. Okay, it could be user ID 123. Okay, hello 123, welcome to Zero Analyst. So this is a simple functions we have created. Now this is how you create functions. Even I can store this result in a variable, then I can return the variable. That is how also it is going to work fine. But again, this is just an example that I have shown you. Okay, so let's solve this one, which is called create a functions that add numbers a and b. So that takes a two number as an input and return their sum. Okay, so that let's say we want to create a calculator that just do a sum of two numbers that it takes the two number from the users. For that we will go ahead and create a functions that kind of do this additions. Okay, so let's go ahead and say that we want to call it def add numbers. Okay, here what you need to learn is that whatever you have inside this parenthesis, these are parameters which is going to be entered by the users while calling these functions. Okay, now I have seen how to call these functions, right? Here I am calling these functions, right? So here I am calling the functions. Now I don't have to write the code, this code again to execute it. I'm just writing the function's name inside the parenthesis. I'm just giving the name and I'm getting my output, right? Whatever logic I have mentioned, that is happening, but I don't see that, right? I simply call the functions by this name. So that is what we will do. So I'm saying def add numbers. Okay, now I want to take two numbers from the users. Let's say I would go ahead and say num1, number 1 and number 2. So these two are the parameters. Okay, now these two parameters user must enter while calling the functions. Okay, so that only the logic is going to apply it. So what we want to do is that once the user enter these two numbers, we want to do something like this. Okay, we can go ahead and say that we want number 1 plus number 2. So this two we want to do, and let's say I want to store this in a variable so that I can print the result. So I can go ahead and say result variable. Inside the result variable, I am going to say, I'm saying number 1 and number 2. See, as soon as I am hovering here, it says parameters 1. So that means this is user is going to enter. Now user may enter anything. It can enter 1, it can enter 2, it can enter 3. We will learn about exception handling later on. But for now you can see user is entering this one, user is entering this one. Now we just need to return the results. So for that you just need to say return. This return keyword is mandatory. Okay, so it is the best practice to use this return keyword. Okay, now I can just go ahead and run the functions. It is going to create the functions. Okay, so let's see how to execute it. So user would just need to say calling functions. Okay, as a comment, user would just need to type add numbers, and it is expecting, see, as soon as user type add numbers, it is asking number 1, and here user is going to enter any, and here user is going to enter any. So user would enter 1 and let's say 5. Okay, let's execute it. You see user is getting 1 plus 5 equals 6. Okay, now if you want to display a nice message as well, also you can go ahead and say that a print message here, print. I can go ahead and say, okay, your sum for number 1 plus number 2 equals, okay, results. So here I'm just going to use the F formatting. Now if you have not gone through the day 1, day 2, day 3 till day 6, I would request you to go through each of the days so that you understand, like you can connect the dot and you can kind of continue, right? So here I want to show the number 1. So here I want to show the number 2. So these are the placeholders, and here I want to show the results. Okay, so we can now go ahead and execute it. So let's see now. You see your sum for 1 plus 5 equals 6. Okay, it's simple way of showing the message what they have entered, right? You can see it here, 1 plus 5 equals 6. Now user may enter anything, right? User may enter like 6 and let's say 255. Okay, you see we are getting the correct result. You can check it here. Okay, so we have seen how to define a functions using parameters, which is using 1 or 2 parameters we have seen. Okay, and just we need to apply our logic properly so that it makes sense. Okay, and we have returned the results using a print statement and a variable. You can see it here. Okay, all right, let's see our next problem that we'll be solving. So the problem says write a function that takes multiple numbers and return their multiplications. Okay, so it is going to ask multiple numbers from the users, and then it is going to do a multiplications of all those numbers. Now we do not know how many numbers user is going to enter. Okay, so for that we're going to use something called star args. Okay, so this means unlimited argument, okay, that user is going to enter. So we will call it def and multiplications, okay, functions, something like this. Okay, now here usually we put our parameters like number 1, number 2, number 3. So I'm just going to now put something called dot star and args. Okay, So this is going to allow us to take multiple arguments. Okay, now we are not sure how many numbers user is going to enter, and we will need to do a multiply with all of them, right? So that is what we will be doing. So for that, let's first create a variable called maybe something called multiplications, maybe mul, okay, which is going to give us the multiplications, and let's start with 1. Okay, because why? Because see, user may enter something called maybe 1, 2 and 3. Okay, so for that what we will do is that we would want like 1 times 2 times 3. So we want basically each of this number to multiply with each other, right? That is what we need, right? So we are starting with a variable called mul, and then because see, we do not know how many numbers user is going to enter. User can enter 2, 3, 5 and 10. Okay, so for that we are capturing using these star args, and we will need to iterate through each of these elements using a for loop, which we have learned yesterday. So what I will do is that I will go ahead and here is that I would say for I in this arg. So let's say this args we are considering as a list. Okay, list of arguments. So I would just go ahead and say for I in args, and what I want is that here I would go ahead and this mul, okay, and multiplications equals what I. Okay, now let's understand what is happening here. Okay, so we are creating a variable, okay, empty, which is called not empty but variable with 1. So where we will variable with 1, because we will need to do a multiplication, so we cannot use a 0 here. Okay, otherwise everything is going to be 0. So we are saying we are creating a variable called mul, and where we are going to store the data later on. Okay, because we know that it's going to be a list, that means user is going to enter multiple numbers, so we need to iterate through each of this number to multiply them and then store the results. Okay, so what we will do is that we are saying for I in args. So first I is going to be this 1, then this 1 is going to multiply with our variable which is 1, and that's going to be 1, right? Then it is going to be second argument, so then I's value is going to change to 2, then 2 is going to again multiply with 1, we will be having 2. Then I value is going to be 3, so 3 is going to multiply with 2, that is going to be 6. Okay, that is what happening here using simple for loop. Okay, now everything is done, we just need to return our result. Okay, return result is what? This mul. Okay, so that is fine. Let's kind of go ahead and test the functions. Okay, so function is created, perfect. Let's now execute the functions. So let's say user is going to enter something like this. Okay, now here user is going to enter 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, let's see. You see, user has entered 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and you can see I'm getting 120. This is correct. We can check with a small. Okay, so if you want to just check with this small, you can see it is 6, because 1 into 2 into 3, that is 6, right? Alright, so we can check with something else as well. Also, if you, let's say that I would say 5, 5, okay, that's going to obviously 25, you can see it here. Okay, let's say 5, 5, 5. Okay, so we would just need to delete extra comma. You can say 3, 1, 2, 5. Okay, you can see it here. Now this is fine. This is how we create functions. Okay, alright, now let's see our next problem, which is going to return multiple values in a result. So let's see the problem. It says function that return multiple values. Define a function that called calculate stats by, and that takes, which is argument called numbers, and that returns sum, average and maximum. So that means this function should take multiple numbers from the users, and it's going to return sum, average and the maximum of that numbers. Okay, so we will be creating this function. So for that, this function is going to, first of all, it's going to take numbers. Okay, so this number is going to be a list where user may enter like multiple numbers, 1, 2, 3 or 4, something like this. Okay, and once user enter it, user will see all these things like sum of these numbers and the average of this numbers and maximum of these numbers. Okay, so we need to create something like this. So let's go ahead and say def, and let's define the function's name which is called calculate numbers. Okay, and colon. So this number is going to be a list which user is going to enter while user kind of call these functions. Okay, so first what we need from this function is going to be a sum, right? So we can go ahead and say create total variable. Okay, so total, you can say total sum, and inside it we can simply, because it's a list, so we can simply go ahead and do a sum of this list, which is called this numbers, whatever user has entered. Now this is going to checking sum, and so this is going to check the sum, right? This line of code. Next what we need is the checking average. Okay, so for the average we need to check the average. So we will say here is that average variable, which is going to check the average. So here what we need, the average is going to be total sum divided by what? The number of elements we have in this list. Now how do you check the number of elements? You can say len of any list, let's say 1 2 3. Okay, so len, you will see it's showing as a 3. Okay, because we have 3 elements, so we can use something called len here. So I can go ahead and say len of this, which is going to be this numbers. Okay, so that is going to give us the length, and this is how we get the average. Okay, once you get the average, next what we need is that we need the max, right? So next we need the maximum values. So for that we can just say, go ahead and say maximum variable, and inside maximum we can simply use max of numbers, because numbers is a list. You can use the max functions, that is going to give us the maximum number from the list. Okay, even if you want to check, we can say max, and let's add one more value called maybe 4. You can say maximum number is 4. Okay, so this is what we need. Now we can just go ahead and say return. What do you want to return? So we want to return this total, we want to return this average, we want to return this call maximum. Okay, so that is fine. Okay, so our function is created. Now we just need to call the functions. Okay, to call the functions, let's add a cell here, and we will say calling the function. Okay, the first of all you need to give the variables. So numbers, inside the numbers let's give a variable call 3 4 5 and maybe 7. Okay, let's give the variable something like this. So now we can call the functions. To call the functions you need to write this. Okay, first of all you need to write total sum, then you need to write this average, then you need to write this maximum. Okay, now all this you can assign into your this function's name, which is called calculate numbers. Okay, so same way you need to divide it, give it this way, because now what is happening, we are calling more than one operations from this function. So we need to give this way, and then we need to print the result what you want to print. So this is going to check the sum, average, min for max for these numbers. Then we can just print the result. So we can go ahead and say print, and we can say print of kind of sum, and in the sum we can print the sum, which is going to be total sum. Okay, we can print the second statement. That's, now this is the f formatting, so I would just say f. So next what we need is that print of, that's going to be average. So I would say here average, and we can use a filler, and here I can put this average. Next what we need is maybe the print of max, right? Max number. We will have fillers, and we are going to put this maximum. Okay, from our result I'll be using a f formatting. Okay, and let's execute it. Alright, so alright, now you can see I'm getting sum of all these numbers, average of all this number, and max of all these numbers. So let's check the sum, which is 3 plus 4, that's going to be 7 plus 7, that is 14 plus 5 19. That means the average and this max numbers is also correct, because you can see max number is 7. Okay, this is how we have solved this problem. Now let's see one more problem which we'll be solving. That is going to be write a function that takes a name and return greetings based on time. Okay, so these functions we will be kind of creating, and for these functions we will need to know something called datetime library of Python. So we will use that library, because this function is going to take a name from the users, and it is going to greet the users. Like if it's evening, and good evening. If it is a morning, it's going to say good morning. If it's a night, it's going to say good night. Okay, something like this we will need to create. So for that we're going to use a library called datetime. Okay, so for that we will say from datetime, okay, import date time. So we are from the date time library, we are importing the date time. From this, let's say we want to see the current time. Okay, so for that we can just go ahead and say, now this date time is imported. I can just go ahead and say date time dot now. Okay, if you want to see this now, this is going to return the system time from the machine. So we will say now, but we want to see the time. Okay, for that we will just go ahead and say time. Okay, if you see here, this time returns the system time. Okay, you can see return the time part from the time of the system. Okay, if you want to see the help, we can just execute it. You can see it here, it's execute of the Python statement. Okay, CPU and the wall clock times. Okay, so from the system it's going to give us the time. Okay, that what it is does. So I would just go ahead and execute it. Okay, you can see now it is giving the today date, which is here, and also the time. Okay, now what you need is that I can go ahead and save this in a variable called current time. Okay, so from this current time I can show you the hour. Okay, so we can go ahead and say hour. You see, as soon as I press dot, I get the function that I have hour, minute, seconds. Okay, you can see all of these functions I have. So I can go ahead and show you the hour. It's going to give the hour in the int like 0 to 24, like in this int. Okay, so you can go ahead and say hour. You don't have to use this kind of parenthesis now. So it is now 19 o'clock, that means it should be evening. Okay, so this is the logic we are going to use while creating the function. So now I'm going to import all this library which is inside these functions. I can do it outside as well, okay, but I'm going to import it inside, so we don't have to import it if in case it is inside. Okay, so let's move them into this function. So from this date time I'm importing date time, and from current time I'm importing the current time, then I am from the current time I am getting the hour. So here this function returns the hour, right? So that is what we will store in something called hour variable. Okay, now we will build a logic. So build logic something like this. Okay, so I would say if, and we can go ahead and say if hour, okay, if hour is maybe less than equals to 12, then what we want, so we can go ahead and say maybe good morning. Okay, so we can go ahead and say less than 12. If it is less than 12, then we can say print what, so we can go ahead and say print good morning name. Okay, name is the placeholder, so we will use a formatting and we will be printing name here. Okay, that's fine. Next we will need one more logic, right? So we can use else if we need only one more logic, but we need multiple logic. So I'm going to use elif, which is my second if. So second if, it is going to check here, I would say if the hour is greater than equals to 12. Okay, that is my first conditions, and I would check using something called end, and I'll be checking one more conditions where I would say where the hour is less than 6 o'clock. So I want to call it good afternoon. Okay, so I would just use the same sentence here. Now this is my second if, so I need to use this colon sign, it's mandatory. So I would say print good afternoon. Okay, good afternoon name, so whatever the name is. Okay, now we need one more, so that's going to be one more elif. So this time we want to check if the hour is more than 18 o'clock, more than 6 p.m. Okay, so for that we can just go ahead and say this hour is greater than equals to 18. Okay, and it is less than maybe 20 o'clock. Okay, 20 o'clock, then we want to call it good afternoon or good evening. Okay, good evening boss. Okay, fine. We will have one more else logic, so that's simple, going to print good night. Okay, and that's fine. Okay, I'm going to explain this how this logic is going to work. So good night. Okay, so now you need to make sure that these logics are not collapsing with each other. You see, the way I have defined, I'm saying if this hour is less than 12, so that means anything which is less than 12, so that is automatically say good morning. Okay, that means it will start from night 12. Again, you can add more parameters, so we can add that again, saying that if it is less than 12 but not maybe but greater than maybe 6, then I want to call it here is like good morning. So here I would need to kind of add one more logic, right? Now I'm just saying that if the hour is less than 12 in the morning, so it's a good morning. Then I'm saying here 12 is not included, right? But here I'm saying the hour is greater than or equals to 12. So 11 is going to, for 11 it is going to give us this good morning. Okay, but if it is for 12, it is going to give us good afternoon. Okay, then for again same way we are building the logic here, you can just go through it. Now then we need to return the results, so we can return the results. Now we can make very simple, instead of putting the print statement here, okay, we can put the print statement here, and here we can just create the variables instead of this. Okay, so let's go ahead and say I want to just create a variables called greetings. Inside the greetings I am just going to store this good morning. Okay, so let's just go ahead and say good morning, let's cut it, put it inside the greetings, so that's called good morning. Okay, so here I want again the same thing, but here I want good afternoon. Okay, because we want to return the results properly. Okay, so I will define the print statement in the return, so that's fine. Then here we want good evening, so good evening, and here we want what is good night. Okay, now in the result, see, only one condition is going to be true, either this, right? So only one condition is going to true. So for that, what you can do is that we can go ahead and we can simply go ahead and say here is that print. Now earlier we could have created like for same variable by the name called greetings, and we could just print the greetings. So that way also it would have worked. But again, I thought of like creating in a simple way, writing maybe the less code. I will say greetings, and here I'm going to put it inside the placeholders, and that's going to say good morning, good evening, good afternoon, and then we want to print the name. So that's one more variable, so that's going to be name. Okay, and I would just use a formatting here, and that is it. We can just go ahead and execute this. To call this, we can simply go ahead and say call these functions. Let's give a name call maybe Rex. Okay, you can say good evening Rex because it is evening. You can see 7 p.m. Okay, you can give any other name, Rahul, you can give Sam. Okay, so based on the time, it is checking the time, and then it is just simply giving the greetings. Okay, now let's do our last project. So that's going to be the end of the day. So the project is very simple. We are going to build a calculator. So here you can see the project. So the project says mini project simple calculator we will be building. Now create a function based on calculator that can perform basic operations like additions, subtractions, multiplications, divisions. Okay, the user will enter two numbers and operation as a string like add, multiply. Okay, now based on the input it should perform that results and it give the results. Okay, so that is what we will be doing. Okay, so for that I'm just going to copy everything and start with a Python file. Okay, so let's create a Python file which is called new file calculator.py. Okay, so here we are going to write our functions, which is going to be a calculator functions. Okay, let me just put it everything here. Alright, so that's going to be our mini project, and we will be building called calculators. So let me just put it outside. Okay, so let's see the things that we need here. Okay, so we first need two input. So one number user is going to enter, the second input is going to be the second number, and then user is going to select operations like add, subtraction, division, something like this. Okay, so now let's start creating our functions. So first what we need to do is that we need to ask the user three things. One is the number one, first number, then their second number, and their operations. Like, so let's say the operations are going to be something like this. If user type add, then we want to do additions, right? We want to do additions. If user type something called sub, we want to do something called minus. If user type something called maybe multiplications, okay, then we want to do a kind of multiplications. If user type something called divisions, okay, divisions, or then we want to do something called divide. Okay, so these are the things we want to do. So for that, let's first build our logic, right? Let's assume that user is going to enter the add as a operations. Okay, so these are part of operations. So let's first create a simple function that simply go ahead and does additions. Okay, so we can go ahead and say add and number. So this is my function's name, and I would just say that the function take two argument, that's called num1 and num2. Okay, so then we will just go ahead and say that colon, and we will say return. Okay, now what I want to return, so I want to return this, which is called num1 plus num2. Okay, now what I need is, this is going to check the additions, right? This is going to check additions. Now we need same way for rest of the functions. So we need something called for subtraction. So it's a subtraction. So number one minus number two. Okay, that's called subtractions. And we need for again multiplications, that's called multiplications. Okay, here I would just need to say star. Okay, let's one do for divisions as well. So we'll say divisions, number one divided by the number two. Okay, so that is fine. Now these are the small function that we have defined. Okay, now we need to build our main functions here. Okay, so main functions will depend on these functions, because we will say that define, and we're going to name it call calculator. Okay, so here we're going to ask number 1, then we're going to ask number 2, and then we're going to ask operations. Okay, correct. So these are the things that user is going to enter. Okay, now we will be using some if logic to ensure that whatever the operation they enter, based on that they get the output. Okay, so we can go ahead and say that if here, if this operations that user has entered, if this operations equals like this, which is called add. Okay, because user will select something, right? So this operation is going to be add. Then we want to simply call this functions, which is called this one. Okay, to call this functions, the function's name is add, right? So we can go ahead and say add of what? Add, and that's going to be number 1. Okay, and that's going to be number 2. Okay, that is fine. Now next we will say elif, if operation that user has entered selected, okay, that is equals to, which is called sub. Okay, then what do you want? Then we want to call this function, which is called this one. Okay, that's going to be same, but this time we want to call the sub functions. Okay, so let's go ahead and say here sub. Okay, now we need one more elif and then one else. Okay, so we will say elif, and if this not sum not sub but mul, which is multiplications. Okay, then we want to call it mul functions, and that is going to do kind of multiplications of this first and the second number. They should be inside it. Okay, else we would go ahead and kind of print the third one. Okay, which is called last one, which is called divisions one. Okay, so for that we will just go ahead and say that else, and here I'm going to put my logic. That's going to be, I'm calling that function which is called divisions. Okay, so that function name is, so here I need to change the name, right? So here I'm saying subtractions, here I would say multiplications, which is mul. Here I'm going to say divisions, and here I'm going to say divisions, multiplication, subtractions. Yeah, okay, so here I would say divisions. Okay, so I am, based on what operation user has selected, I'm just calling that mini functions which I have created earlier. Okay, and then I'm going to store this result into something called a result. Okay, result variable. Okay, so that I can print the result in the outcome. So I would say result of this, and I would say result of this. Okay, and I would say result of this. Okay, that's fine. Then I can basically print the outcome. So that's going to be print, and we can go ahead and whatever the operation they have selected, okay, we can print the numbers. So we can go ahead and say that I want a placeholders where I would print the numbers, and then I want one more placeholders where I would print their operations, and then I want equals, and then here I want to display this result. Okay, so first one I want to print number 1, whatever they have entered, number 2, whatever they have entered, and here I want to display the result. Okay, now here if in case by any chance if they select any incorrect operations, we can show them an error as well. So for that we can go ahead and kind of add one more logic. We may do that later on. Okay, now our function is almost ready, so let's see what else we need, right? So let's quickly go through one by one things. So we have mentioned this is going to do the additions. Okay, this is going to do the subtractions, multiplications. Okay, this is doing the divisions. Fine. Okay, then we are defining our main functions, that's take one numbers, number 2, and select the operations from the users. Okay, and here we are saying if operations equals add. Okay, now we are comparing these operations with a string, so we will change them to as a string, so using single quotes or double quotes, and then we will do this additions. Same way here also we will change them as a string. Here also I will change them as a string. Here also I will need to change them. Okay, so these are the 3 operations. Okay, and we can add a f here, so for f formatting. Okay, that is result also inside this curly brackets. Okay, now we will be adding one more condition. That means if they select any incorrect operation, they should be getting error. Okay, so for that we will be using this one as a elif. Okay, so we will say elif operations equals divisions, which is our last functions, divisions. And then we will be adding one more conditions called inside the else. Okay, and we will show a print message called print. Okay, and we will say please choose correct operations. Okay, the options are add, then subtraction, which is sub, and then we have kind of multiplication, which is small. Okay, then we have called division, which is deep. Okay, so this is what it's going to kind of show error message. Okay, so that's fine. Now things are kind of sorted. Let's go ahead and now execute this function. Now we are using Python file, so we cannot directly call these functions. Even if I run these functions, it's not going to return the results. Okay, now to execute this code, we are using Python, so we cannot directly call these functions. Okay, so either you can use in the Jupyter notebook, but if you want to execute this function, the whole functions by Python, then we just need to write a line of code. So you can say executions of this applications. Okay, so now this is kind of building applications, right? We're building applications, so just one line of code to say something like this, which is called if underscore and name. Okay, then into say equals, and then into say double quotes, and then we will say kind of double underscore and main. Okay, double underscore. Now this is going to trigger this applications, and then we can return whatever we want from this the executions. Okay, so we want, first of all, as soon as this everything is get triggered, we want to collect this input from the users, right? So what do we want to collect? We want to collect the number 1. So we will say number 1 equals int of input. Okay, and here we would say please enter number 1. Okay, so same way we will collect the number 2. That's going to be number 2, and same we will collect the operations, right? So for that we will say operations. So we'll say operations, and here we will say please, okay, choose operations. Okay, choose operations. Will be giving the options called add, then we will say subtractions, then we will say divisions, mul, or we would say divisions. Okay, so user will get all these options. Once everything is done, what we want now, here we want to call the functions. Okay, to call the functions, we will simply say calculators, all of this, right? All of this, and we will store in something called result. Okay, and last we will print the result. Okay, print the result. Now everything is ready. Let's go ahead and execute the code. So let's right click, open in terminal, and it's asking for the first number, so that's 1. Second number maybe 5. Okay, so we'll say add. Oops, seems like we're getting error on the operations. Okay, we're trying to convert the operations to int, which is giving us error, so we missed something. We don't have to convert it into int, so let's go ahead and delete this. Okay, let's go ahead and run it again. Run in terminal, enter first number, let's say 5, second number, let's say 8, and add. You can say I'm getting the additions, which is 5 plus 8, that is 13. Okay, so this is how we are getting the result. Okay, now we can add a lot of other parameters, like to ensure that if in case our function doesn't return error, we can also go ahead and kind of build other logic as well here, but this is the simplest way of creating, you can say, calculator. We can see it here. Okay, we are assuming that user is going to enter the correct operations and the correct number 1 and number 2. Okay, let's say if the user doesn't enter the correct numbers, then we will be getting the problem, right? So the problem is that's going to be that it's going to give the error sign. Now let's test it one more time with maybe any incorrect operations. Let's see. Okay, so for that we will go ahead and say run in terminal, and asking for the 5 numbers, so it's a 55. Second number is something like this. Okay, we are choosing something incorrectly this time. Okay, I would say just go ahead and say XYG. Okay, so we're getting error, but here we're not getting that, the options. Okay, so that means we need to again check if this else logic is working. So the way it's not working because we have not created and stored this inside the variable. So now it should work fine. So I will go ahead and right click in terminal. So first number 55, second number maybe 32. Okay, choose options, which is going to be maybe something like this. You see, please choose the correct operations at sub, mul and divisions. Okay, and so that means now the user is getting options. So we can go ahead and say that again. To run the file, we can just go ahead and run in terminal again. So for that, right click, run in terminal. So we'll say here 55, 22 or 21. So we want like multiplications. You can see we are getting the multiplications. Okay, so this is how this function is working. Alright, that's it for this video. Thank you so much for watching the video till the end. If you really like this content, do subscribe to my YouTube channel. Have a good day. Take care. Bye bye.